One of our goals for Devastated Dreams is to make it more story focused than Neverending Nightmares. And Neverending Nightmares, um, people had different reactions to the story, and Neverending Nightmares was unique in that we didn't want to tell a story, in that we didn't want there to be easy answers. We wanted it to be very open ended and almost cryptic, to focus on the emotions. So it was all about conveying emotions rather than a story, and the characters are meant to be symbols. They're not meant to be realistic, like realistic people with motivations and thoughts and things like that. They're supposed to be representative of things, which is an interesting approach to video game narrative, and I'm not sure how successful it was, but I think a lot of people wanted a story. They wanted that sort of thing that a lot of video games provide. And in thinking about it, I personally enjoy story in games immensely, and so it seemed a little weird that I was creating a game that didn't provide something that, I would look for in a game. So with Devastated Dreams, we really want to tell a good story, and to me, it's almost less about the story. I think that the best thing a game can do is build a world, and what that means to me is basically you understand the place you're in, and you have an appreciation for that, and things tell you more about it. And so, I mean, there's many games where I just love to be in that world, and I think an example could be like Mad Max Fury Road. Like, when I watched it with my wife asked, like, why do all of those cars, why they have monster trucks burning gas and people spitting gas into a carburetor? That doesn't really make sense if they have a fuel shortage, which is 100% true. But then I think, to me, the Mad Max Fury Road, the amazing thing about it was the world. It was sort of this evolution of like this tribal society where the world that we know now is destroyed, and car culture is the only thing that survived from our current world. And so all of the beliefs and actions were built on this love of the internal combustion engine. And so the decadence of kings manifested itself through vehicles rather than monuments or pyramids or whatever, which, I don't know, it sounds like, that sounds like something like, yes, sign me up for that. I want to find out more about that world. And certainly Mad Max Fury Road had a good story, but the thing that really sold it to me was the world, and that was the really amazing thing about it. And I think, if you're looking for a good world in a movie, I'm having trouble thinking of one that built a more compelling world. But, if you're looking for a story, right, like the fact that there's a guy playing a guitar that shoots flames on bungee cords, either you are willing to accept the ridiculousness of that as it fits into this almost ridiculous world, right? This caricature of car culture. You're either going to accept that, or you're going to say, this is silly, why are people acting like this? But, it also extends into games. I'm just kind of in love with Mad Max Fury Road. But, like Panzer Dragoon is one where the world is really amazing, and the story in the first two games, the story in the second game was really hard for me to understand, but it didn't. There's not a lot of story beats, but it didn't really matter to me at all. The story wasn't there. I just loved being in that world. And like Silent Hill, there's been amazing stories told in the world of Silent Hill, But like when I went to go play Silent Hill Downpour, which I knew was, not a great game, right? I just wanted to be in Silent Hill again. Like I felt like I could be in the place of Silent Hill by being by playing this game. So the world building is super important to us, and something interesting is that with Devastated Dreams, we're trying to build a world that somewhat mirrors real life, life in the Philippines. Obviously, everything is filtered through the lens of a horror game, but we want to reveal more about the world and what might shape the character, and it's really cool because we can just use sort of real life examples. So if you've played the demo, there's a bunch of stuff about Super Typhoon Yolanda. That's a significant thing in sort of recent Filipino history, given that it was a very terrible tragedy, and that's actually going to play into the narrative of our character later on. So we're not just putting in random facts about the Philippines, but I think if you look at the notes that we have in game, and maybe I'll talk more about them specifically, it's trying to reveal something about the world that affects the character, and also shows something about the Philippines. So one of the notes is basically about a child who hears a tick tick, which is a creature that will appear later in our game, in a swang, and it's written from the perspective of a woman who writing to her husband, who's clearly not there, and to me it's significant in terms of, okay, firstly, it talks about tick-ticks and a swang and whatnot, which is really important to setting the stage for the horror in the game, but sort of as an added level, which people may or may not get, and the letters probably need some tweaking in terms of writing, and that's something I like to kind of lean on the backers to help me with that. But the other thing that I wanted to convey with that's kind of significant is that there's a number of people who work abroad in the Philippines. There's a lot of people who work on cruise ships, or in the Middle East, or in Australia, or Singapore, or US, or wherever. The families are kind of split, and then they send money back, and so that sort of situation is hinted at with this letter. I guess she could use email if she had a computer, but the idea of the letter is that it's sort of this long distance correspondence. So again, you don't need to know about the fact that a lot of Filipino people work abroad to appreciate that it still sort of fits into the world. But I think if you think about it, then you might say, oh, families are being split up, and I think the reason why the families are kind of being split up is, the poverty. Filipino workers can earn much more relative to the Philippine peso by working in other countries with stronger currency, and then when they send money home, it can really help their families, even if they're doing something that they could conceivably do in the Philippines. So that's sort of a thing that sort of builds the world with just a little information, and while I'm not sure the fact that some Filipino people work outside of the country is going to be particularly relevant to this story, it only took a few words to communicate that, and I think a lot of the world and the story will be communicated through these notes, and I think the advantage of that for a horror game specifically is if two people are just like chilling, talking, that's not very scary, and I had a bunch of these scenes of characters together and ideas for all these other characters in Neverending Nightmares, and then I ended up throwing it all away because I felt like the isolation, the loneliness, being by yourself is scariest, and also, doing cutscenes with characters, is a lot of work. So it sort of is good on multiple levels, from both a development schedule standpoint and a scary standpoint. But on the flip side, it makes it more challenging to convey something realistically through these sort of notes and whatnot. And the one thing I really want to avoid is sort of immersion breaking, and at least to me, I think it's immersion breaking when you find items that are completely unrelated that you wouldn't really find there. So, like, let's say the main character finds an audio log of, the main enemy in, like, a lady's bathroom, and the main character is, like, a man. And that seems ridiculous, but then, like, if you play, like, Bioshock Infinite, I think someone else pointed this out, but there's, like, just audio logs of random characters randomly strewn through the game, and it works on a narrative level because basically you find out more information, information that sort of, assumes the earlier stuff throughout the game, but from an in-game world, you probably wouldn't find, Lady Comstock's audio recording in the Rebel headquarters or whatever. I can't remember what the specific example was. So we're definitely going to be using that technique, and I think it's interesting because then basically we're trying to tell a story about the character, but we're somewhat limited as far as, having the character's correspondence or things, having the characters say things about herself. And that can be challenging, so certainly we're building out the world by, having notes from the lives of neighbors and other people, and we have a lot of ideas for how we can sort of reveal information in a way that would be more interesting, besides just the here's a note, items. I think that the student ID is an interesting one, and I feel that it reveals a lot about the character, but it takes some thought. You have to put some thought into what conclusions can be drawn from that, and I think that's really interesting from a narrative perspective, because then you're not, hitting someone over the head with it, but it also conveys, useful information. And one might say that the location of the student ID is maybe not the best, but I think, perhaps the character was there previously and it fell out of her pocket, or perhaps it's, we do have the sort of contrivance that the game takes place in the context of nightmares, and so we do get a little more leeway, I would say, in terms of believability, because these are nightmare escapes, so we can do things like finding, key items maybe in a place that they wouldn't. But I mean, obviously we don't want to lean on that too heavily, because I think then, it starts to feel really gamey, and so it's important to us to not feel gamey, because that destroys immersion. So anyway, I sort of touched on a lot of different aspects of the story, or of how we're telling the story, more so than what the story will actually be, and the main reason for that is because we want the story to be a surprise. We want it to be something that you uncover. It's almost like a detective game, in that you're presented with events, and you try to find meaning to them, and that meaning can evolve as you find out more things about the character. And so I think, that's something that Silent Hill did really well, and that's something that we really want to emulate. It's Neverending Nightmares, I think, did not do that specifically, and I think that it was because we wanted everything to be super open-ended, and the characters were symbols, and it's very difficult to characterize something that is just supposed to be a symbol by giving the character backstory. Then at least I felt during the development of Neverending Nightmares that would take away from the symbolism, the what the character is supposed to represent. If we gave them more depth, then they're less a representation, and they're more an individual, a fully fleshed out being. I mean, obviously not a real one, but with Devastated Dreams, I think we're finding more of a middle ground between, we don't want to spoon feed you a story, right? Because I think that isn't the best for games, right? Because then you're sitting through a bunch of cutscenes, and it's like watching a movie, and then maybe you should just be watching a movie, but we do want that sort of a little bit of I don't know. I mean, we don't want it to be cryptic, but we want it to be a little bit challenging, I guess. You have to think about the story to get the meaning. So I think by spreading it through different story beats and different items and telling you about the world, I think it's going to be a story that you have to construct together, but I think it's going to be a story. It's going to be something more meaty, something more understandable than Neverending Nightmares, and certainly that's something I'm open to work on with the backer community. If people feel like we need more concreteness to the story, then I'm interested in working with that. If they feel like it's too straightforward, then we can remove some clues or work on that as well. So anyway, thanks for watching.